Hello class, so I'm going to do a few demonstrations of different ways to use the offset filter to create patterns. Let me just go ahead and clean that up. Essentially, there aren't a lot of decent videos online of using the offset filter. There are a few that aren't really what we need to do. In last class, we had to go fairly quickly to get through everything, so to kind of even that out, we're going to go a little slower. I'm going to show you some pattern processes. We'll get it from there. So first off, let me go ahead and just demonstrate the offset filter again in case you've lost your notes. I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, and you'll have to excuse this ancient version of Photoshop. This is the laptop that has my screen recording software on it. I still need to reinstall it on my newer computer, but I haven't quite had time to do that. So I'm currently in an ancient version, but that's fine. It will work. The offset filter will work fine in this as well as the new ones. Offset filter's been around forever. That's one of the reasons that I like it so much. There was briefly this great pattern creation system that allowed you to do tessellations and patterns and everything. And then when they switched to CC, they got rid of it. So we're not using that one. So all that said, since this is going to be one of the patterns, you always want to double check your sheet of paper that has the handout directions on it. In this case, we're supposed to do 2 by 2 inch patterns at 300 DPI. So I'm going to set this from pixels to inches. I'm going to pop that in as 2 and 2 and 300 resolution. That's pixels per inch. So pixels per inch and dots per inch, I use those interchangeably. I really should just start saying pixels per inch. That is the more correct way of saying it these days. You'll notice that I'm using very old software, so I don't have the super fancy stuff that you guys do, but it's the same kind of deal. So we're just going to create a quick pattern by inside the square. So a few things. You'll want to make sure you don't have gaps. You don't want to have banding. You don't want to have kind of weird seams. And banding is just when you have a pattern that's so obvious it repeats, you can easily see this strange line that's not really there starts to show up to you because you're spotting it. You can get rid of that by adding some random bits and pieces. All right, that said, let's go ahead and start with something really simple. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to just use my square marquee tool here, rectangular marquee tool, and let's do black and white. We'll just have some fun with that. So let's make it even simpler. I start by filling this entirely with black. Alt-Delete to fill with the foreground color. I'm going to take my marquee tool. I'm going to Control-I to invert, and Control-I to invert again, and Control-I to invert, and Control-I to invert, and Control-I to invert, and Control-I to invert. I'm just moving this marquee around. Control-I. Pretty neat, right? All right. So I'm going to offset this, and remember, it only offsets the layer that you're on, which makes sense because a filter only affects the layer that you're on. So here we go. I'm going to go to Filter, Other, Offset. And here's our offset menu. Just going to zero this out real quick. Again, exactly in class, as long as you have wraparound on, which means that when we move something horizontally, if it moves past the edge, like 218 pixels past the edge, it's going to just bring it over on the other side. I move it vertically, since the wraparound is on, it's the same deal. As I slide it over, it just starts moving. So you notice that as we reposition it, there are certain areas in here that, and I'm going to tell it okay, certain areas in here that immediately you can see that it would break up because there's just this big space, this black space right here. So I'm going to do another marquee tool, Control-I, another marquee tool, Control-I, marquee tool, Control-I, marquee tool, Control-I, marquee tool, Control-I, marquee tool, Control-I. So again, just kind of saying that off. Blah, blah, blah. So we've got this kind of thing going on. So it's kind of interesting. The main thing though is if we were to turn this into a pattern, and so if we went up and we did Edit, Define Pattern, and if we pop this into a larger document, so I'm just going to Control-N to make a new document, set this to inches. I set this to 10 by 10 just so that we can test this. So now we have a much larger document. Notice if we click on the information in the bottom left here, it says that it's 10 inches by 10 inches. The reason it looks the same as this one is because this one is zoomed out at 50%. This one is zoomed out to only 8%. So that's all that's going on. So since we did an Edit Define Pattern, I can click on the adjustment layer, new adjustment layer. I can tell it pattern. Now remember, there is also the edit fill pattern, and that will let you pick a pattern and load it in. We don't want to do that though. We want to be able to adjust our pattern. So instead, the adjustment layer pattern. Check that pattern out, tell it okay. So we can see that this isn't so great simply because there are these bars going on between it. And we can see like this repeating glunk of stuff here. So I'm going to go back to this. I'm actually take a few steps back, Control-Alt-Z to keep stepping back in history. We're going to do something a little bit different. And okay, we're about as far back as we can go. So I'm going to take the marquee tool and I'm going to make it about the same size as before. Bam. All right, now I'm going to Control-I. Now I'm going to keep in mind that we were seeing some banding on the, sorry, not banding, we're seeing some gaps on the sides. So I'm going to go back to the filter, other, offset. And this time, instead of a horizontal, instead of a vertical offset, I'm going to do a horizontal offset. There we go. Tell it okay. So again, take my selection, and Control-I, Control-I. Yeah, I don't like it going straight down, so I'm going to undo that. Control-I, there we go. Control-I, just zigzag it across. Control-I, Control-I. So I want to actually save the selection. I like the size of the selection. I don't want to lose track of it. This isn't part of the assignment. This is just something that's useful to know. You go over to the selection and save selection. We've got it in this current document, which is just called Untitled 1. I'll make a new channel layer. That's fine. We'll call it square. That's a rectangle. All right, which means that over on our channels palette, we now have the red, green, and blue, and also a saved square. And we can load that back in using the select load selection. All right, that said, I'm going to offset this again because we can see that it doesn't connect over here. We need to do another zigzag. So the reason that I saved the selection is because if you have a selection and you do an offset, being a filter, it will only apply the filter, the offset, to the inside of the selection. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I've got a layer selected. Go to Filter, Other, Offset. Before I do, notice there's also an offset up here that will repeat the last filter with the same settings you had before. We don't want the same settings. We want different settings. So we're going to go Filter, Other, Offset. Instead of going horizontally, we're going to drop it vertically. And I got lost. So what I'm going to do is actually click in here and using the up arrow, it will let me move very slowly. Using Shift up, I can go instead of by 1 pixel at a time, I can go by 10 pixels. And there we have it. This is the area that needs another zigzag. So I'm going to go back to my selection under Select, Load Selection, called it just Square. Load that real quick. So pop that in here and Control-I. So that's looking much better. That's looking like a much more interesting pattern. And so I'm going to go ahead and test it now. In older versions of Photoshop, this is a good idea to go Control-A, Edit, Define Pattern. You guys are all on CC, I believe, so you should just be able to go to Edit, Define Pattern, and it'll work every time. We'll call this Squares. All right, we'll come back over here. So here's the original. Not a lot to look at, kind of gross looking. We'll come in here and we'll go to our adjustment layer and we'll add in a pattern layer. Whoa, crazy. I like it. I think that this is a pretty decent pattern using just the offset filter. It's hard to lock on to a immediately repeating theme. It looks like maybe these squares, but they're kind of random. They're kind of offset. That's more of a texture than a pattern. That's perfectly fine for this. This is the kind of thing that you want to do. So let's go ahead and do a slightly more complicated example on the next video. This one I think shows fairly well just how to do this. But before we start up a new video, don't forget to save your pattern. Control-S. Pop this thing right where it needs to go. I'm going to toss this into a folder that I prepared on my desktop, simply called Pattern Spring 2018, and call it Finished Patterns, and we will call this Squares. Yes, I misspelled that. Squares. Well, close enough. We'll call it squares. See if I can type that correctly this time. There we go. Squares. Save it. Okay, we're set. All right, see you next video.